Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Nick, John, and Jamie Show. All by myself, don't wanna be all by... All right, enough of that. Yes, I am, for the second time in the duration of the show. This is John, by the way, and I am alone in the basement once again to bring you guys all the fantastic, nerdtastic, geektastic news, reviews, and opinions of our show, the Nick, John, and Jamie Show. Nick and Jamie are unfortunately indisposed. They're not able to record this week. Definitely sorely missed. I am here with me and my thoughts, and of course, if you guys are listening to the show with you guys. And without further ado, let's get into what we're drinking this week. We're drinking, I mean, we had a bunch of people over for the Super Bowl last week. Just to segue just a bit, the original agenda for the show was going to be, we were going to go through our favorite like we did last year, go through our favorite Super Bowl commercials, tell you thoughts and opinions about the Super Bowl that was last Sunday. Today being, we're recording a little late. We're recording on a Thursday the 6th, but which is kind of, because I'm recording on Thursday the 6th, I feel like all the Super Bowl stuff is kind of done. Everybody's seen all the commercials. Everybody's talked about it. It's been all over news and social media. So I'm going to just pass on giving my thoughts, views, and opinions on the Super Bowl and, all the commercials. Well, I'll give you one opinion. One thing I did think is that the Super Bowl, the commercials this year were way better than they were in probably the previous 2 or 3 years. And I'm sure everybody here has seen them, but actually I'm going back on what I said. One of my favorites, the Jason Momoa, taking all of his buffness off because he had all kinds of appliances on, and seeing him sort of CG'd into this skinny, balding dude was quite a treat. So let's get into what we're drinking this week. Actually, one of the leftovers from the Super Bowl party was that we had at our house. My wife Cindy and I had at our house was quite a tasty beer. It's a Southern Tier. It's by 2X. It's actually 2X IPA by Southern Tier Brewing. It's Double India Pale Ale. So I don't know if I had this. I think I might have had it. I had quite a few beers on Sunday, but I don't recall having this one. I think I had it before. Ooh, it's a bit of a bomb too as far as like ABV. It's 8.2, and let's give it a go. Ooh, tasty. I approve. So let's get into it. Let's get into it, the box office. So this is a box office a little late. Like I said, it's Thursday the 6th. This is for the box office for the weekend of January 31st through the 2nd. Bad Boys for Life was number one at the box office. Despite what I thought about the movie, it's still making quite a bit of money. Well, quite a bit of money for January. January tends to be a bit of a dog, but it's definitely making back its money. It did $62 million over the weekend. And it's about $148 million total gross. So Will Smith is, whether you like the movies that he's been making now or not, he's definitely bankable movie star for sure. Not that there was any doubt. And then number two in the box office is 1917. Definitely on the list. It is, I believe, an Oscar contender, and just haven't seen it. I have every intention to. It looks like a fantastic movie. Doolittle, even though it got scathing reviews, it is third in the box office. It did $55 million. And then this new one that just debuted by United Artists, Gretel and Hansel. Hansel und Gretel. That did $6 million at the box office. No interest, no desire. It looks like a pretty throwaway movie. And then Jumanji, The Next Level, 8 weeks in the box office, did what was it, $2 million? I'm sorry, $6 million. $6 million. Yeah, I'm definitely going to see it. Just not going to thunk down that cash. One thing I did see that didn't make it to the top 5 in the box office was The Gentleman. And I spoke about this movie before. I had a desire to see it. It's second week in the box office. It's not doing great, but I don't think it's was meant to be some killer box office, juggernaut. Did $50 million worldwide, and domestic about $22 million. So it's making some money. Not a huge budget. It's not like some big special effects blockbuster. So I'm sure Guy Ritchie is satisfied with the money that's making. It's definitely, and I mentioned this in previous podcast, it's definitely in line with old school Guy Ritchie. What was it? Snatched and was it Two Smoking Barrels? I know I'm fucking that up, but Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. That's what it was. I saw it. I thought it's starring Matthew McConaughey. It's starring Hugh Grant. It's got Colin Farrell on it. It's got Charlie Dunham in it. It's got about 1 million British accents and a couple Irish accents as well, which is just watching them sling dialogue in the various British accents is just candy to the ears. You can listen to it all day. I don't know if I'm from England, if it's candy to the English speaking, not English, but people from England. But I could. And I think that's my favorite part about this movie is the dialogue. The dialogue, it's clever, it's dry, it's witty, it's like a big piece of chocolate cake. And it's just entertaining as hell. I didn't think it was, like I said, it wasn't as good as, the two movies I mentioned, which was Lock, Stock, and Snatched. But entertaining to say the least, and definitely worth a watch. Someone to look out for in that movie is Hugh Grant. Holy shit. I haven't seen Hugh Grant in a movie in a while, and he plays this slimy character that is just delightful. And he's got this accent that is like just nothing like I've ever heard. Hugh Grant in everything that I've ever seen him in seemed very posh, very educated British in my mind. And in this, he just seems like this slimy little snake, and the character he plays is just delightful. So I highly recommend if you haven't seen it, check out The Gentleman. It probably isn't. In my mind, you can wait for it to come on video or on demand. We're at the $4.99 HD rental or $5.99 HD rental for sure on on your cable service. But definitely worth it, especially if you want to revisit that dialogue, that scenery, that type of character that Guy Ritchie likes to bring into those movies like Snatched and Lock, Stock. And Matthew McConaughey is really good at it too. He's way over the top, but delightfully so. And that's it for the box office. I kind of segued into some of the things that I've been watching, and that's basically what I want to talk about. Is just that I don't have the guys here, so I'm just going to throw down some of the things that I've been watching. Guys are way busy, so I doubt they're chewing up as much content as I am. So I'll fill in the gaps when before they come back with some of the things I'm watching, and they're most likely not. One of the things that I watched, which I watched with my wife Cindy, which was A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. This is based on, obviously, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the series that ran from 1968 to 2001. I was floored that it ran that long. For some reason, I thought, because I remember it, I'm 48 years old. I remember watching Mr. Rogers as a kid. I remember when he passed, how heartbroken I was. he was a fixture in everybody's childhood, especially kids that grew up in the 70s and 80s. Well, now, you know what? I can't even say that because my kids who are, tweens and teenagers they were all over Mr. Rogers when they were kids. I mean, my youngest, he still remembers the show vividly. He remembers a segment where they went to a restaurant, or Mr. Rogers went out and about, and he went to a diner, and the cook at the diner took him behind the scenes and made him a sandwich. And my son actually, for the longest time, ate the sandwich. Asked for it. We would make it for him, and it was we called it a Mr. Rogers sandwich. It was a very simple sandwich. It was 2 slices of bread with some a slice of cheese, tomato, and lettuce. And he'd cut it in half and wrapped it in foil. And long story short, it was Mr. Rogers is near and dear to millions of people. And when he passed, it was definitely a heartache. And revisiting this property, I don't want to cheapen it by saying it's a property, because it's an emotional movie, especially if you have a connection to who he was when you were a child. A lot of people, they'll go back to quote unquote formative years, and that's usually when you're in your early teens to late teens, and people have said, I know I've read articles where they say that's where your tastes sort of solidify. That's probably why Nick and Jamie and I are so into sci-fi and fantasy and just basically movies, like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and things of that nature, because we were watching those movies and X-Men and comic books. We were digesting all that material in our formative years. So when we visit these nostalgic movies, things that harken back to the 80s and 90s, it's because they've resonated with, they locked in when we were teenagers or early teens, or even 9, 10, 11, 12, and then through our teenagers, those formative years. It's not very often that we get to be nostalgic and go back and visit our childhood. When we were little, when we were kids, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, those years when you're watching Mr. Rogers, and A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood does that. It's Tom Hanks who, when I found out that Tom Hanks was going to play Mr. Rogers, I was like, of course he is. He's got a reputation as one of the nicest guys in Hollywood. He could, even though he's not, and I watched the behind the scenes. Tom Hanks is much more animated. He's much more, in real life. He's much more, he's all animated. He's animated. He's he gesticulates and he sort of talks with his hands, and he's very, open and entertaining, in which I think Mr. Rogers' his motivations were all about the kids. So, and tuning into the kids and the things that he says, you see sound bites of Mr. Rogers and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe how genuinely devoted, kind, and sincere this individual was, who dedicated his life to loving children, loving people, loving love. And there's a big message of that. It's a through line in this movie. The thing that did surprise me, because I didn't dive in and do a lot of investigation on what the movie was about before I saw it. I just knew I was going to see it because one thing in particular, because I did see the documentary called, God, I want to say it's Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but it was A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. That was the movie that I saw. But the documentary, it's just escaping me right now. But it was basically about Mr. Rogers, and they pulled back the curtain a little bit and talked a little about his history, and then since I saw the documentary on Mr. Rogers, obviously after he passed, it just made me want to watch this Hollywood depiction, and I don't mean Hollywood to cheapen it, but Hollywood depiction of or the story that involved Mr. Rogers. And I say that because it's not a biopic of Mr. Rogers. It's actually centered around this writer named Lloyd Vogel, who is loosely based on this real-life award-winning Esquire magazine writer named Tom, I know I'm not pronouncing his name right, Tom Junod or Tom Junod, who wrote this piece on Mr. Rogers. So there's some loose tie-ins to Tom Junod and his interview, and the character of Lloyd Vogel is loosely based on him. And the story actually centers around not Mr. Rogers, but this character Lloyd Vogel, who's a magazine reporter, a very cynical magazine reporter who is known for killing people's heroes, taking somebody that is a celebrity of mythical proportion and, taking them out at the knees, exposing them for the sort of real life, dirty behind the scenes people that they may be. And so that's who this person is. And you peel back the layers of this guy, Lloyd Vogel, and again, the story is centered around him. And you find out that, he's got demons, he's got a past and he's got issues. And Mr. Rogers weaves his way into his life because he's been assigned to do what he calls a puff piece for Esquire, not investigative journalism, on Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers, of course, does what he does, which is tune in and say things like, who's the most important person in the world is right now? You, because I'm here with you. And that's just who he was. And so the story is beautiful. The way it's shot is really, really artistically interesting, because they build these interstitial scenes in between, the live action scenes of, going from Mr. Rogers scenes. Everybody knows Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood from the beginning and ending of the show, and they take that aesthetic, and if the viewer is going to New York, they apply that same aesthetic to the New York scene as an interstitial before they go into whatever activity the main characters are having in, say, New York. Very, very good, cool. I mean, Tom Hanks, he just delivers. He delivers this touching, very patient and thoughtful performance. And it's just this really delightful combination of a trip down memory lane of who you were as a child, and it just tugs at your heartstrings. Heartstrings that you kind of forgot you even had. That's the real beauty of it. And then you find yourself, and my wife and I, when we're watching it, of course, you get, it's one of those tearjerkers, because of the connection to your childhood. But the thing that we found ourselves doing, which was kind of funny, which is, singing the songs like Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood and calling out characters when you go and visit the set that they recreated at the actual studio in which they filmed the actual show. Incredible attention to detail. And you see characters like Mr. McFeely and Lady Aberline and Daniel, the puppet tiger, and King Friday, and you're like, oh, I remember. And it's like, it's just a great movie to watch. And again, it just does this so artfully, the way they weave in this contrast of this broken, cynical writer finding his way, or trying to find his way, and how he connects with Fred Rogers. And then Fred Rogers, God, they depict him in a very real way. There's a commentary on the bonus tracks, because my wife and I bought it through iTunes. I didn't know he died 2 months shy of his 75th birthday. He was undergoing surgery for stomach cancer, And then, I believe shortly after he wound up passing. I'm not sure if it was the cancer that got him or actual complications because of the surgery. But I do remember distinctly when he died. And it was a gut punch, And then you think, this is a children's television show, producer, or writer, creator, I should say. And he just had an incredible impact on the world. I know what it was. Won't You Be My Neighbor was the name of the documentary. So if you do watch A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, I highly recommend that you also watch Won't You Be My Neighbor, the documentary that's really about Fred Rogers. And the other thing that I've dove into a bunch of different shows before I started the show, which was Apple TV. I'm not sure. I don't think Apple TV is doing as well as some of the other streaming services. Obviously, Netflix and Amazon are kings in the streaming service right now, along with Hulu and a couple of others. But sadly, and I think we predicted this, Apple, I think they're a little late to the party, and their content is not real strong. So Apple is actually giving, letting people take a look at some of these premiere shows for Apple TV Plus. You're able to go on and get the first episode free. So if you have an Apple TV or an iPhone or something like that, you can actually go on and watch the first episode of some of these new shows that they went hard on at the WWC3, the Apple conference that they do annually, which we did a podcast a while ago called Rotten Apples. I can't remember the number, but if you want to check that out, we did a review on Apple and streaming services and stuff. And if you want to check that out, you can check that out in one of the previous episodes. But the point that why I bring it up is that we did kind of shit on it and say, like, yeah, Apple, I think you're a day late and $1 short, and your content, as much as you're trying to push it, it's probably a little weaker than some of the other offerings. So if someone has a choice of whether they're going to thunk down, $12 for Netflix or, $8, $9 or whatever it is for Apple TV Plus, and they have to make that decision. Because the content isn't as strong, they're probably going to choose a Netflix over Apple TV Plus. Anyway, that being said, I saw the first episode of and because it was free, I figured let me at least check it out. Even though we had some preconceived notions that it didn't matter and we're not going to watch this shit anyway, I did watch it was, it's starring Jason Momoa. It's got Alfre Woodard in it. The scenario or the scene is the movie, I should say, the series is set in this post-apocalyptic Earth where disease or tragedy had taken hold of the planet, and at one point it wiped out a bunch of people. It sent the planet into the dark ages. Technology, everything sort of went away. And you can see that the Earth is starting to heal itself. The premise being, or the myth being, that man fucked up the planet and the planet fought back. And one of the ways it fought back was unleashing this disease that killed most of the population, and then left children and adults, generations born into blindness. So it's a world of blind people in a very primitive post-apocalyptic world. It's starring Jason Momoa and Alfre Woodard. I mentioned that in the beginning. It's always cool to see Jason Momoa go barbaric, right? We got introduced to him, at least when I first, Nick will tell you it was one of the old sci-fi shows that he was on very early in the days, and then I know he was on Baywatch. But I let's face it, everybody got really introduced to Jason Momoa when he was in Game of Thrones. You know, when he was Khal Drogo, that's Jason Momoa, and he just was a badass in that show. Even though it didn't go long, Khal Drogo made an impression, enough of an impression to, you know, get him this show as well as, you know, a seat in the Justice League. So that being said, it was okay. It was okay. It's got beautiful scenery. You know, it looks like they're shooting in, like, I don't know, upstate Seattle or, you know, someplace with mountains and lush forest and like beautiful fields. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous scenery. It's fun to see how similar to A Quiet Place, fun to see how they compensate for blindness. You know, they use like walking sticks. They use knotted thread for like written words. When they're in hand-to-hand combat, they'll tend to grapple and lean on things and sort of have to get physical with real in close proximity. So that's interesting to watch. Seeing some of the innovations that they had to sort of bring to bear because of you know, being blind. That was interesting. The writing and the acting, I mean, it's just my opinion, right? It's kind of meh. I mean, outside the blindness element, it's a pretty tired trope, you know? Jason Momoa is the big badass of the tribe. There are there's these innocent babies that need protection from, you know, this wayward female stranger. The village is, you know, all back Jason Momoa, but then there's this evil force that is creeping up behind him that are like these religious zealots that look to burn heresy, and heresy being like if you talk about being sighted or having sight is a good thing, you know, then you're a heretic. Or if you there's again just one episode, so a very limited understanding as far as what the rest of the series would look like. No pun intended. But it's kind of just meh, you know? I wish it was better. I really do, because I like watching Jason Momoa do his thing. And I love the idea of a sci-fi post-apocalyptic world that is, you know, has to operate with this in a very unconventional way because they introduced blindness into the storyline. One other thing. It's like, I know I'm going to sound like an asshole, but the haka thing, like, you know, you see it in Australia with the rugby players and you see it you're seeing a lot of it. And I get that Jason Momoa has some star power and that he is, I believe, Polynesian descent. But they did this haka thing before they went into battle. And I was like, yeah, I get it. And it's cool, but it kind of took me out of it. Like, you know, if you're in what seems like the Pacific Northwest, haka is very regional, you know, to, you know, Polynesia and not Polynesia, but like Hawaii and Australia. It just seemed like Jason Momoa was like, hey man, I want to do this. And someone said, sure, let's work it in. But it made it very clunky at that particular time. And that's a minor gripe, but this show's definitely I'm curious to see where it's going. I hope it gets better, but I don't have high hopes, honestly. Last, as far as the things that I've been watching, is the morning show, again, because they're giving you a free episode, the first episode for Apple TV Plus, so I figured I'd give it a go, was the morning show. It's starring Jennifer Aniston and Steve Carell and Reese Witherspoon. I mean, phenomenal talent. I think the premise is really cool. See what's going on behind the scenes of a morning show, knowing that there's a lot of frosting on the other side of the lens. If you ever watch morning show, they're talk about puff and fluff. That's all puff and fluff. But to get a look at sort of the grittier side of the behind the scenes of that job and that experience is very interesting and compelling. Jennifer Aniston, here's where this, out of all the shows that I saw on Apple Plus, I'm talking about the ones I watch and then the ones that they have in their arsenal. The morning show seems the most compelling because of the writing and the directing and the acting. Holy shit. Like, Jennifer Aniston brings it. Steve Carell is on point. Reese Witherspoon, wow. She's all these people, it's no secret. They're legit talents. And I think that and the writing, this show is it's a shame is what it is. It's a shame because it's on a network or a streaming service that I think is going to linger for a long time anemically, but is not going to, unless, Apple acquires somebody, that streaming service I think is going to struggle for sure. And on top of everything else, it's kind of like too little too late. Apple owned content. We forget that they were the ballers, man. They were the players. They were the players. They started with Apple Music and then with iTunes extended into movies way before Netflix had an exclusive streaming service. And they had their chance. They had their chance to own this market, and they stalled. And, that's because of Apple's being run by an operations guy and not an innovation or a creative guy. It shows in their content. It shows in their products. It shows in their lack of innovation over the years. And it really is a shame because, they were king of the hill and they could have taken this streaming service and really, really cornered the market. So I think for Apple, it's a little too late. But out of the shows that I did watch, I thought the morning show was definitely the front runner, shining star. And again, I think it's obvious it's not enough to make me sign up for Apple TV Plus. So that's pretty much it for this week. It's just me flying solo. So, but tune in next week because we'll be back in the basement, me and the guys. And we're probably going to talk about Margot Robbie's movie, Birds of Prey. It's Birds of Prey and the fantabulous blah, 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 emancipation of the blah, 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 Harley Quinn. My early instincts and impression is I don't think it's going to be good. Hopefully I'm surprised. It's comic books, and every comic book movie that does well means that they're going to make another one. And if they're going to make another one, that makes me happy. And Margot Robbie, holy shit, she's a legit talent. And, if she's got the right direction, and she's a producer on this film, so hopefully she's had some insight or some input, and she was able to, really up the game and make it a worthwhile movie. So the jury's still out on that. We'll probably talk about that next week. Also, what we want to talk about next week, just to give you a quick preview, is in light of the Oscars. Today's the 6th, so it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and on the 9th, the Oscars, the 2020 Oscars are going to being aired. And that's this Sunday, February 9th. But what the thing is, and if you've listened to the show, if you're a fan of the show, we'll be keeping with our annual tradition of NJJ Show's nerdtastic version of the Oscars, something we call the Stanleys. After obviously it's the Stanleys, but it's the Stan Lees. named, of course, after the great Stan Lee, the late great Stan Lee. It's just where we run down our favorite movies of 2019, and then we, in our own delusional minds, we honor our favorite film with our very own and prestigious Stan Lee. So look forward to that, and look forward to that because it's always a fun time, especially when me and the guys are in here running down and recapping all the movies that we watched that we thought were really fun and special and tickled our fancies in 2019. So that's it for this week. And as always, do the like and the subscribe, and most importantly, have a let's call it a Stan Lee worthy week.